Let's talk about that title. It's not that I won this championship twice before. It's that the day after each of these two championships I've done the last 2 years, I woke up with AFib. And I didn't want that to happen again. Hey cycling community, this is Steve Grusis, the Cycling Greek. When I was warming up for this race, my legs were feeling good, really good. That told me that all my months of training, starting from pre-season, and especially the last 2 weeks tweaking for this event, had paid off. I actually didn't commit to having this as my goal event for the season until after the first couple of months of racing. I wanted to see how my heart and AFib situation would react to racing this year. Let's talk about this race now. We had the largest field with 27. I'll be talking about participation numbers for this championship later on in this video. While in the past we had a lot of individual riders in the championships, now we had a lot of teams. We had Penn Velo with the largest number of riders of 5 and Teslov with 4. We had Sierra Nevada with 3, and then we had about 4 other teams with 2. That meant that 20 of 27 of us had teammates while 7 of us did not. It also meant that I wasn't going to be doing any work. Still, the first few laps I rode toward the front. I didn't want anybody to get away early without me in it, and I was looking for combinations. This was my best race of the season, even better than a couple weeks ago when I podiumed on this course. Reason being, it shows how much I've improved from the early season races where I was getting dropped every time. We were always on in this race. It never really seemed to let up. Even on the descent, if you weren't on a wheel, then you were sprinting to make contact. In the distance, you can see a Penn Velo rider that took off early. I was not in a position to go with him, and that's probably a good thing too. He'd get a huge gap. We'd bring it back a bit, and then he'd bring it back up again. It was a long race to go solo, but he looked like he had the legs where he could actually do this. Or at the very least, he'd get a small group to come up with him, and then they would be gone. Starting the back-end rollers for the second time, I'm sitting behind Cal Nat's Robert Anderson. Even though my climbing has improved, I always had to make sure that I was in good position, just in case. With the wind coming from the left to the right, we always hugged the right side of the road as we were starting to climb. The 21 mile an hour average we had for this race doesn't seem like much. However, we had 11 4-mile laps in which the total amount of climbing was a little over 3,000 feet. There were no big climbs, but we had a series of 4 or 5 sharp climbs on the back end, while the front section was a combination of flats and 2 long low-grade climbs, including the finishing hill. Here's an example of what I mentioned earlier. We're now entering Homicide Hill descent. We're all pretty much together, but the rider in the blue on the front, he starts to drop like a rock, and then he creates a big gap, and now we got to go chase to get him. Same thing with the riders in the back of me. The guy in the front is doing a lot of chasing while the others are taking advantage of that. There were a number of fields on this course at the same time, but that didn't seem to negatively affect us. There were a couple times when we passed fields when those at the front would just drill it in hopes of creating a little confusion and a gap for themselves. That never did work out though. My memory or my eyes fail me every once in a while. I think it was a Penn Velo rider that was off the front solo. I think before the third lap we did catch him, and then he started to go off again on one of the small climbs on the front end. It was either him or one of his teammates. Starting the back end rollers, I'm still in good position and I'm still feeling strong. As we're all strung out, Cal Nat's Robert Anderson is still leading the charge to bring back that Penn Velo rider. He must be quite a threat. Something you may have noticed with the graphics in the upper left-hand corner. While the high for the day in the valley was about 100 degrees, over on the coast here the high was 70 degrees. And with us being in the first flight, the temperature just crept up to 50 degrees. As if I didn't learn my lesson last time, I let up a little bit on this corner, and that same guy with the blue jersey just started dropping like a rock. Now I'm trying to chase him, and I'm finding that I can't catch him. Eventually, I let up and let the riders behind me come through so I can get on their wheel, because I'm going to overcook myself when I really don't need to. At the start of the front section, we bring back that solo breakaway. Hitting the back end rollers for the 4th time, I'm still feeling good, I'm still in good position, but that thought is starting to go into my head, I wish there were less laps. In processing this video, it just confirmed what I was starting to think, that I made a dumb move during the race. You had 2 people going off, but these were 2 individual riders without any teammates. I burned a match, and I don't have a lot of matches to burn, by chasing after these guys and ultimately him. I should have never started the chase. I should have stayed on the right side, because again, the wind's coming from left to right. It's not a lot of wind, but it's enough to make a little bit of a difference. And when everyone else came up to me, then I would have just stayed on that protected side. But no, I saw a couple people wanting to start a break, and I wanted to go with them. One of the advantages to having that rear camera is that it can illustrate some of the dumb moves that I make. Entering the rolling section for the 5th time, I'm still in good position, but pressure is being applied at the front, and I feel it. Sixth time up, I don't know who's at the front, but he's got us stretched out, and we're hanging on by bungee cords, some of us. This causes me to use another match. Now, if you don't race, you probably don't have an idea of how happy I was when I saw them go from being stretched out to being bunched up. That meant, for whatever reason, they slowed down, and I was exceedingly grateful. Each time I entered the rolling section in the second half of the race, I was further and further in back of the pack. Now, in this lap, I was so far back I was now subject to the accordion effect. For those of you that don't race that are watching this video, the accordion effect is that the people in the front are going fast and going smooth as they're going through the turn, and there's little gaps that are being created as you go down the line. When they finally slow up toward the front, I still have to keep going faster longer until I catch up to them. If you look at my rear view cam, you'll notice I'm getting closer and closer to the back and further from the front. We again enter this in pretty hot, and we're stretched out. We are now ascending this climb the fastest that we have thus far in this race. The rider on the left of me decides to attack. What this is going to do is, as we're bunching up, it's going to cause everyone to stretch out in order to keep up with them. And that's going to cost me a couple more bananas. As I alluded to toward the beginning of the video, let's talk about some race numbers. I mentioned that our field of 6064s was the largest field with 27. As you can see, there were relatively large fields all the way down to the 45-49s. Now, in all the races I attended this year, and including a number that I didn't, the 55 pluses were one of the largest, if not the largest, group of the event. For as long as I can remember, and I started racing in 1990, the racing association I'm a part of, Northern California and Northern Nevada, always had 35, 45s, and then ultimately 55 pluses for their racing categories. With our decreasing demographics, we started a discussion on what to do with the Masters categories. Next year I'm going to be 65, and there's going to be a few people in this group that are aging up to 65. But still, that may not justify having a 65 plus field. One of the ideas that was presented was that we drop the 35s and that we have a 40 plus, 50 plus, and a 60 plus. Seemingly, that seems like a viable alternative. If you're a viewer that's part of this racing association, let me know what your thoughts are. If you're from another association, let me know what you guys are doing. And now, back to the race. As we are heading toward the start of the last lap, my legs are dreading going up that finishing climb. Finally, my legs just give out, and then the rest of them just go on. Now, this isn't my last lap. I go ahead and I finish the lap. But when I come in and finish, I finish dead last. In spite of that, I consider this my best race thus far this year. Probably because it was so tough and that I showed improvement in many areas that I was working on. Oh yes, before I forget, it's been about 5 days since the race as I'm putting this video together, and I never woke up AFib. Now that is a plus. I hope you enjoyed this video. Remember, comment, like, subscribe. The Cycling Greek.